This is a generation that cannot imagine the world without the internet or cell phones. They are family-centric, achievement-oriented, and team-oriented. With some of these traits defined, panelists, what we want to discuss tonight is centered around racial and generational interaction. How do we, as other races and ages, intertwine with you, the millennial, of other races and ages? So I want to know right now, what's on your heart when it pertains to this specifically, the intertwining of the millennials with society? Jamie?
Wow. Thank you, Dr. Pam. I appreciate that. And first, I just want to say thank you all for everybody that's tuned in. I think this is a very important topic for everybody to be able to view. And I really love the diverse panel that we have tonight. And I really appreciate everybody that's on this panel. I've worked with you and some of you in one way or another, and others I would love to work with a little bit more. But I know for me, I'm not originally from Tyler. I'm actually originally from Missouri, and it's the very remote northwest part of Missouri. And I've been here for 12 years. I've got a deep-seated love for Precinct 1, which is what I live in, and I'm married to Sergeant Willie Mims, and everybody knows who he is and what he stands for, and I stand by my man and what he stands for. And when it comes to race, where I'm from in Missouri, it was a very small town, small country farming town. Everybody took care of everybody, and everybody was open to conversation. Everybody was, from the young to the old, everybody was able to talk to each other about our concerns. And there was never this issue. It was really a non-issue for Blacks and whites and Hispanics and Asians. Everybody had to survive together in order to progress. And so for me, really, I grew up with not knowing hate. I grew up with not knowing that there was a differences in races and that certain people are more privileged than other people. I was not raised with that. And that's just the honest truth. And so I kind of come into this with a little bit of a naivety, I guess you could say, where some people will look at me saying, oh, well, since you're white, you must be privileged. And yet they don't know me. They really don't. And if you knew my backstory, I would be more than willing to sit down with you to tell you how I came and where I came from and how I was raised. So I guess that's it for me, Dr. Pam.
Thank you, Jamie. Dwayne?
Well, thank you. So I guess for me, I've been in East Texas pretty much all of my life. I was exposed to a lot of different things, for as race and kind of knowing where you were, kind of like where your place was, if you will. And so to your question in regards, like, what can we do? I think it's things like this, having the open panel, open dialogue, and being open and honest with each other in regards to where we are as a society. And then not only having a dialogue, but also being able to listen to one another, and I think that's the biggest thing I would say for me, is to be able to hear other people's perspective and not be offended if someone, for example, like what Miss Jamie said, they don't know. So for me, just being able to listen and then also be able to give our own candid feedback and for that to be received. So that's what I think would help for us.
Awesome. April?
Thank you so much. I was actually going to piggyback off of one of Mr. McAllister's points, so I appreciate that. When he mentioned, us having that communication and starting by having this dialogue and opening the door for us to be able to maybe share with others what our experience has been, and then when we're listening, listening to actually understand and not just speaking to be heard and then walking away or shutting down at the end of I've said my piece. And so you've heard what I had to say. I'm not really interested in what you have to say, because there is validity to what each of us is bringing to the table. There's validity when some of us say, I didn't experience that growing up. It was very different for me. I've not known that until, I came to a place like East Texas. And then there's also validity for some experiences that the rest of us have had where we can say, I remember being in grade school and experiencing some of these things that you say you've not experienced. Well, what a blessing. Maybe you've experienced some different things. Maybe they weren't in terms of race. Maybe they were in terms of classism. But I do appreciate you being at the forefront of this project per se, and saying, we're going to have different people from different walks of life being able to share their stories, and then for all of us to be able to hear each other and understand and say, okay, now what are we going to do moving forward? So there's validity in what you're saying and what I'm saying, but how are we going to make this okay for everybody?
Awesome. Thank you, Ms. April. Cornelius.
Yes, ma'am. So I love what everybody said so far. And I am born and raised here in Tyler, from East Texas. So I've had a lot of different experiences, on both sides of the street, if you say. But what I think that we need more than anything here is I think that we need to learn to take the emotion out of the situations, especially situations that are factual situations, because we can't trust our emotions, and most people are just responding based on the way that they feel, and our emotions will lead us in the wrong direction 9 out of 10 times. And so if we learn to take the emotion, what emotionally attaches us to the situation, out and place that aside and actually get the facts and actually listen, like what she said, listening to understand. Most people listen to respond, and they're responding because they're emotional. But if we can learn to take our emotions and put our emotions aside and stop trying to make it about us and where we come from and what our experiences are, then we'll overall have a better society, because we're basing it off facts. And when you base it off facts, you can actually get to the root of the problem, which allows us to try to really reach some solutions.
Awesome. Veronica.
Well, I think that first, acknowledging the fact that we're Generation Y, or the millennials, it puts us in that awkward state where we are, becoming aware right after all of the horrible things happened, and then getting to experience periodically only things that we had read about in our history books. And some people have had those experiences, like several of the other panelists have mentioned, and some have, or they've just been in different ways. But I think it's really part of education. It's part of communication. And by being educated, I mean culturally. Some things are offensive because we lack the understanding. Cornelius was right on point when he said we've got to remove the emotion out of it and really look at the facts. And I think that part of that is understanding a person's culture, understanding where they come from, and then, like everyone else has mentioned, having the ability to sit down and actually communicate, and then just being compassionate. Like you would want someone else to be considerate of you and your situation and understand your upbringing, or at the very least respect it. So that is something that we should practice.
Awesome. Nick?
I want to echo what Jamie said and thank everybody for their time, and Pam for your leadership on organizing this virtual town hall. I think the 3 big points I want to make with respect to the question is, number one is the diversity. I think that so many times we get caught up with what's seen versus what's unseen in regards to diversity. Just because of the color of someone's skin, or maybe they worship at a different place than you, that's not where the diversity stops, right? It's their background, it's their geographical diversity, it's the age diversity. So I think taking that into consideration, I think you made a point about our generation, the millennials, growing up with technology. I think that technology, especially social media, has given us a platform. And the question is, what are we going to do with that platform? Are we going to use that platform for good, Are we going to use that platform to promote social justice? What are we going to do? And then the other part, Cornelius mentioned facts, and I heard a couple other panelists echo that. I think the problem we have today, and as millennials, the problem that we have to confront, because we are now, the largest generation out there, and we're the largest generation in the workforce. I think we have to combat facts that we no longer agree to, right? I think we used to all operate under the idea that we had these common sets of facts that we all agreed to. And I think in today's, political dialogue, I think in today's community dialogue, we don't always agree on what are facts. And I think that's going to be a big battle for our generation moving forward.
Awesome. Caitlin.
Yes, ma'am. Thank y'all for having me. I think I was kind of like a little late entry, but I'm excited to be part of the conversation. So you have to excuse me, I am a journalist at heart. And so I did, as I was kind of thinking and putting some, just again, kind of like Cornelia said, take a little emotion out of it and just kind of talk, say what I want to say. I did write it down for myself. But when I was asked to be part of this, it was through a friend of mine, Lisa, who's in Leadership Tyler with me. And the way that I kind of perceived it was millennials are becoming quickly and are already becoming the young leaders of our society. And I think that as far as what we do to bridge that gap and what we do to make real change is it's really, if it has not happened already, it's time for us to step up and to step up with true transparency in today's world and everything that we are facing at the moment. I think that transparency is about your feelings on what's going on. And I think it's also about your questions that you have. And as far as, coming from a young white female, I have questions, and I am not from Tyler. And in my opinion, I came from a bit of a more diverse area. And I've had some of those conversations with my friends of not realizing that my new home was not quite what my old home was. And that realization when I had it, and I was a little ashamed of myself, I guess, not knowing that. But so there are definitely questions, and also being transparent about your shortcomings is it really important, I think. And I think that if you can be transparent on that front, then you can't be quite as faulted for the questions that you have if you're being genuine. I do think that a lot of young leaders, especially, are operating with the fear of rubbing people the wrong way with anything they say, truly just because we're living in this weird culture of calling people out for maybe not being so eloquent as maybe they could have, or using the wrong words, or maybe just not saying things the way someone else would have. Even if they're being positive and genuine and truly trying to put a positive message out there, almost always there's someone who's going to have something negative to say about it. And as leaders, it's hard to have that thick skin and just do it and give that message or that statement. But I think that at this point, as young leaders, we have to be having these open and honest conversations and have to have that transparency. And supporting our friends and our neighbors of color is especially important now, as it ever has been, because that's what, in one way or the other, we're all talking about it and needs to happen. As far as I'm concerned, and where my heart lies on, the question that you asked is, we're all God's people, and that's how I was raised, and everybody should be loved as such and respected as such. And I hope that whatever I do, as far as like my impact or when I'm gone, that it reflects that too. So
awesome. Nancy? Is Nancy still with us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, dear.
Thank you again, Dr. Phoenix, for putting this panel together. I definitely agree with everything everyone's mentioned, especially the transparency part. Kaylin, you're so right about that. I think one of the things that we need to do as leaders is to be transparent, and also research shows that we tend to migrate toward people that look like us, talk like us, are educated like us, have the same type of hobbies as us. So we tend to kind of stay within that same little circle. And if someone is different or not in that circle, we tend to, like Caitlin mentioned, and we all know, sometimes we think, oh, it rubs us the wrong way. So we have to be open to knowing that there are people that are different than us, and to have that thick skin, because there are times where people, have questions and they don't mean it in a derogatory or racial way. They just have sincere questions that they're so afraid to ask because they're afraid that people will label them as something. And so we have to be able to have those be transparent so that people can ask us those questions and be able to answer them for them, because sometimes people just don't know, and we need to be able to work with them and educate them. I know I do it all the time with the Latino culture community. Sometimes people just have simple, plain questions like, why do they do this a certain way? And it's very simple for us, but in the Latino culture, we kind of tend to stay together and migrate and be with one another. So anybody outside doesn't really get it. And so sometimes education and transparency is key.
Awesome. Sierra?
Hey, everyone. Thank you again, Dr. Phoenix, for allowing me to be on this panel today. You have to excuse me. I'm in the car in crazy LA traffic on the 405. So I definitely wanted to make mention of some of the things that the previous speakers stated as far as transparency. That is obviously one of the biggest things for me as far as being a millennial and trying to be a leader, learning all of the fundamentals that are needed in order to help others be a great leader. But I think for me, one of the bigger things that I want, not just the millennials, but the other generations to know is that we also need leadership from them that correlates with how we communicate. Mm-hmm. So it's not just about their ways and how they grew up and the traditions and the decorum that they prefer. Is you have to be a chameleon, and you really, because we have to do that. We, like you said, we grew up in technology, so all of our knowledge is ever changing. We always have to verify everything. And then it's so many different methods of trying to find transparency. A lot of times, just like Miss Nancy stated about education, some people just want to know. So you have to make people feel comfortable with, what they're asking, because if they feel comfortable enough with asking you, that means that you have something that makes them feel as though they can speak with you. So I think sometimes we have to take ourselves out of the equation and think, okay, well, what was going on with them? What did I have, or what type of energy did I display to where they felt comfortable enough to ask me that? It's not really always a great idea to be on the offense, or to be on the defense and just say, okay, well, I didn't agree with that, I didn't like that, and this is automatically how I'm going to perceive them moving forward. I think that as leaders, we have to be extremely humble. We have to be extremely forgiving, and then we have to make sure that we are leading with open hearts and open minds. So,
amen. Ms. Paulina.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Pam, for having us. When I'm thinking about Tyler for me is love. Tyler, for me, I think about the hundreds of churches that we have, all the pastors, people that cares about what's going on. I think communication is the key. If we have these kind of forums, if we have committees, when we all go together with the community, we have to be in the community. We can talk for hours and hours, but if you are not in the community, you will know what is going on, what is truly going on. And I'm very happy to be here. And I think I'm ready to start listening what else we have to say today.
Awesome. Thank you, Ms. Paulina. All righty, millennials, it is time for the questions from your public. Let's start with Mr. Dwayne. Dwayne, how do you feel about the term snowflake? Now, let me set the prerequisite. These questions come from your public. So how do you feel about the term snowflake? And I had to look it up. I'm not gonna lie. I didn't even know what snowflake meant. But as a millennial, how do you feel about the term snowflake, Dwayne? If you need a definition, I do have it.
Reply, please. So I would say that's not a word that I use. I have heard it over and over again.
Really?
Oh yeah, I've heard it quite often. Even now. I think my feelings about it is the same as I think how as the African American community feels kind of about, you know, the word that we don't like people to say.
Really?
Depending on that individual. I think a lot of times it depends on the individual and how they feel. And just in my experience and what I've seen, some people might be offended by that and others might not, you know. But I try to watch what I say. I try to make sure that the things that I say are, for lack of better words, uplifting, and try to make sure that, you know, I'm always cognizant and aware of my environment and where I am. So as far as my feelings in regards to the word, I don't, that's not a word that I personally use, but I've heard it quite often.
All right then. I might be the only one that never heard the word then. Miss Sierra, share if you agree or disagree with Mark Stern, who is a Canadian conservative author and commentator, regarding the statement he made on public radio, and explain why you feel this way. His quote was, "This generation is a hyper-present tense generation, and unfortunately, it's determined to destroy everything it doesn't understand," which is quite a lot.
I think for me, I can agree and disagree. So, because one of the benefits of our generation is that we have an extremely large amount of information always thrown at us. And I think one of the biggest things that confuses our generations from others is that it's a wait your turn. You need the experience. But I think a lot of people in our generation are so heavily educated. We spend so much time getting educated, we haven't had time to get the actual experience. So I think the hyper present, you know, being present, let me join, I want to be a part of something, is so ingrained in our generation, because a lot of times the people who are leaders are in those roles don't truly want to let us in because we haven't earned our paid our dues. And that's a big thing that I know a lot of baby boomers especially have mentioned about my generation or our generation. So that's one of the things I hear all the time is, well, you have to work your way and wait your turn. And I know you said conservative, so I'm not really sure if that's from their ideologies or if that's more of a lower class expectation to wait your turn, because I know others don't have to wait their turn. They can pay to play. So I really don't like that statement at all. But I can hear where he's coming from, given his political background and then his generation. I can understand that because I grew up with my grandparents and traditionalists who are not even baby boomers, you know, as well as baby boomers. So it's extremely structured. It's if you work hard enough, if you work for 30 years, you're going to get that Rolex watch, or you're going to get that recognition, and that doesn't exist for our generation. So
awesome. And panelists, please ensure you're checking the chat box. Miss Jamie, do you believe two people born in the same generation, growing up with completely different personal experiences, more than likely feel differently about systematic race issues?
In my opinion, I would say yes. And this is my reasoning, is because, and I'll revert back to how I personally was raised. And basically I'll just say it was 99.9% white community. However, I was also raised in a very Christian upbringing that you truly love your neighbor. Even if you didn't experience other races, you still respected each other. You still loved each other. You still looked out for each other. And so I'm blessed to know that that's the way that I was raised. And that's how I'm raising my children, who are half Black and half white. And yet I have met other individuals that are my age, that are 36, and they look at me like I'm from a third world country. They're like, well, what are you talking about? No, I mean, there's this class and there's this class. There are these people that are born with entitlement and people that aren't. And I'm like, no, it doesn't have to be like that. And I feel strongly, no matter what generation you are from, I really think it starts at home. I really think that if you started at home by teaching your children what's right, what's wrong, there are consequences for your actions. You always have a choice to do the right or to do the bad. And when you don't teach that at home, and you only teach one side of things, whether it is hate or there has to be this difference between classes, or because you're poor, you always have to stay poor, or you're rich, you always have to stay rich, that's just going to keep getting passed down. And I think we are doing an injustice to our children by doing that. So yes, I do believe that there is differences in how people, our generation, and of the same age, can grow up that way, and have views on racism and race in general. But again, I just feel it starts at home with how we raise our kids to do the right thing. That's my opinion.
Awesome. Mr. Cornelius, should a person feel oppressed if they go to a McDonald's drive-through and first they give the person their coffee, but then a few minutes later they want to come back and give them their Egg McMuffin that they ordered? And this stems from the situation with a police officer going through a drive-through and waited a while and was told to move to the reserved area and they'll be out with your order. And the McDonald's representative brought them their coffee with no food. And the officer replied to them, "Don't worry about bringing the food."
Okay, well, I can tell you that happens to me all the time, and I don't feel oppressed. I just feel like they might be busy. So no, I don't think that. I think that that right there is entitlement at its finest. I think that there's situations that you can't control, and then there's things that is very well that it's within your control, and it's important to know when you're in each situation. And McDonald's bringing you your coffee and your food's not ready is it's not a situation that you should overthink or get upset about it. I mean, I understand some people in a hurry, but it's definitely not one of those situations to where it's oppression. I mean, it's a day at McDonald's.
Just to piggyback on that a little bit, there were controversial comments coming in pertaining to that specific issue. Some were for the police officer, saying, you know, they should have some compassion for her. And others were like, okay, all of us go through McDonald's drive-through and have to pull up to the waiting sign and have to wait 10 minutes sometime before you get your order. And she said that she was misconstrued with the way that the public was taking it, that she was saying it hurt her because she felt that they didn't trust police officers anymore and that they may have done something to her food versus being, you know, fearful of her. So would that change your response?
Absolutely not. I think that that's a form of paranoia. If that's the case, you probably shouldn't go anywhere public. You probably should just eat at home and prepare your own food and meal prep. You just can't help how other people feel, but you also can't help how, you know, how busy an establishment is at any given time of an hour or a day. So, I mean, I think that's just paranoia. I think that, you know, we have to think about things a little bit better and handle ourselves a little bit better. Like I said earlier, you know, we got to think without being emotional. And I think that was an emotional response.
Gotcha. Miss Caitlin, do you think the generational gap is largely political and the difference in years among generations is being used as a scapegoat?
That's an interesting thought, for sure. I think that it can be said that the big gap, the generational gap, correlates to some political views, but at the same time, I feel like a lot like what's been said before, it's coming back around a lot to how you're raised and the environment that you're in, more than it is, I think, the age that you are, the generation that you're a part of. I think that our generation, because of how digital savvy we are and how media hungry we've become, I think that there's a lot more conversation surrounding politics, and there are probably a lot more, sorry, that's my dog, controversial conversations around politics going on. But at the same time, I don't think that it's particularly the generational gap that's making a difference in politics. I think it's the world we're living in today, and I think that it's the amount of media and the amount of information that we're able to find and consume, and I think in our environment and how we're raised, I think that's what's really driving the choices, the political choices that we're making and views that we have.
Gotcha. Cornelius, you had a short input?
Oh, no, ma'am. I think I raised my hand when Sierra was talking, actually.
Okay. Ms. Veronica, how can the city be sustainable for anyone regarding housing, public transportation, and daily necessities?
I think it's acknowledging the demographics, like where everyone is first, because what may be sustainable or comfortable for one area or one family may not necessarily be for another area. So definitely looking at demographics is dire. And then finding an accommodation for each class is definitely important. I think that's pretty much it. It's just really paying attention to the demographics, the people, and what their ability is to do.
Do you believe in the city of Tyler that there's a disparity?
I do. I do.
No comment?
Yeah, just I do.
Gotcha. Miss Nancy, what are local schools teaching students about race?
That's a good one. You know, I think that a lot of schools, depending on where they are geographically located, tend to focus more on a lot more cultural type of ideas and traditions versus others that, you know, maybe don't have the resources. And resources, I mean by the parents becoming more involved in working with the staff, the local staff, principals, school teachers, becoming members of the PTA. You know, we can volunteer as well as parents to become more engaged, more involved. I know I do, to be able to educate people more about the Hispanic Latino cultures and traditions in areas where I see that maybe they don't have as much variety as they do you know, in other schools. And I think that's one of the things that they are definitely striving. I think that Tyler ISD's done an excellent job, specifically here in Tyler, as far as creating what's called Tyler ISD Espanol. It's been something that we've sought for so long, and that's something that particularly in the Latino community has been excelling and just been very productive and successful. I think, like in anything, it's very important to note that not everything is being taught like we all want to, but like one of the other panelists mentioned a while ago, there's always going to be something that we all have our own opinion about, that maybe this wasn't covered, this should have been covered, they should have talked about this was not in the textbooks. So you're going to get a lot of that regardless of whatever textbooks you utilize or whatever information you provide. But I think a lot of it, in my personal standpoint, also goes back to us as parents, as families, that it has to also happen at home. At home, I think we need to take advantage of that we are with our children and educating them from the get-go as to race, as far as the importance of all of us as human beings, as individuals, and how to really value and really be happy that we are different. That's what makes us very special and, in my opinion, beautiful. And this is why our country is made up of a lot of immigrants, and this is why I think it's a great country.
Awesome. Miss April, how would leaders assure a correct response for the community as a whole regarding race being taught at schools?
I was just reminded that I was muted. Thank you. That's an interesting question because, you know, as Nancy mentioned, not everyone has the same opinion, the same upbringing, the same experiences. And I think for the most part, schools will play it safe by, when they're addressing race, they focus on customs and traditions, the pretty part, the nice part, the part that's not going to get you in trouble. And so when you mention how leaders can ensure that race is addressed properly in school systems, it's going to involve things like what we're doing now, bringing different community leaders to the table, bringing people from different backgrounds to the table so that it's not just one opinion, so that it's not just one-sided. And so as a result of bringing that round table together, determining what is it that we value most and what characteristics would we like to see in our students. You know, there are several districts that have a profile of a graduate. Well, you know, in terms of that profile, sometimes we focus on things like, what do we want our graduates to be able to do once they go into the workforce, once they go into institutions of higher education? But in addition to that, what core values would we like for them to have? And so in order for leaders to ensure that that's happening properly, I think it involves a process much like what we're in right now, obviously on a bigger scale, and there's going to be a lot more planning and a lot more conversation, and it's going to be much deeper, but really having those difficult conversations behind closed doors so that as a result, you can come out from behind those doors and say, this is what our graduates need to embody as they leave us. This is what we want them to know when they leave XYZ ISD.
Awesome. Nick, you had a quick comment?
I do, very quickly. I think that, well, I do appreciate the comments about, you know, it starts at home and the way we raise our children. I do think that we all fall into the trap of thinking everybody starts at the same place. You know, some people don't start on first base. Some people aren't even up to bat. Some people aren't even in the stadium. Not everyone has two parents at home. Not everybody has, you know, some people may come from a single mother household who may not have a fatherly figure. Others may not even have that. Others may be in the CPS system, or maybe raised by a relative, grandparents, aunts, uncles who have to work. So that, you know, while I appreciate that, and I know that I personally try to strive for that with my children, I think that a lot of times, and I think COVID-19 has taught us this, that the job that teachers have is very, very difficult, because not everybody has that family unit at home that a lot of us do have, you know. So I think that we need to be aware when we're maybe falling into that trap of thinking that everybody's got two parents at home. Some people may have parents that are incarcerated or whatever it may be.
That's good, Nick. You know, that makes me really think about how society believes society is constructed from their specific perspective. You know, the family that has a mom and dad in it thinks from the mindset that every family has a mom and a dad in it, and they don't really understand. They can't sympathize because they don't understand how a single parent family functions. That when you have a single mother or a single father and they have 4 or 5 children, and they sometimes have to have the older child to watch the younger ones while they are at work in order to make sure that there's food, shelter, and clothing. They can't understand that perspective because they've never been in it. So, Nick, I definitely understand where you are coming from, and that was definitely on point. Nick, the next question was for you. For those millennials who would want to keep the peace, what are some things that millennials can do during times of friction between civil matters?
I think it goes back to what we talked about earlier. You know, we are the generation that grew up with technology, and I think we have a very loud platform. I mean, your tweet can be seen throughout the world. So I think that, you know, it's up to us to bring civility back to the conversation. You know, I think that back in the day, and I guess I'm dating myself, I just made the cut because I was born in 1982. But back in the day, those of us who listen to rap music, who grew up with it, you know, we used to always talk about, you know, studio gangsters or whatnot, right? And these rappers and whatnot. I think you have keyboard gangsters these days, right? I think being behind a keyboard allows you to say whatever you want to say without having the repercussions of saying that, you know, live around people. So I think that, you know, social media has been, and just technology in general has been a double-edged sword. I think that on one side of things, it's great. You know, it's a huge megaphone. It allows everybody to have a platform. But on the other side of things, it puts us in a position where, you know, you can say whatever you want, and you don't really have to face some of the people that you're offending. So I think it's up to us to use the platforms and those voices and really the credibility that each one of us have in the community. Everybody on this panel has credibility. That's why you were asked to be on this panel. So it's up to us to leverage that credibility and figure out how we want to use it. And I think it's by bringing civility. I mean, if you respond in kind to someone who offends you, then the tension's going to go up. One of the panelists talked about removing emotions. You can keep them in check by trying to bring the civility back to it.
Awesome. You know, I tell you, I'm gonna have to get with a millennial or a Gen Y, Gen Z, or Gen something, because these platforms are just going too fast for me. I'm just now getting Facebook down. I'm trying to learn the Instagram from my grandson, and now they got something called TikTok. I'm like, TikTok? You know, what's up with that? But, you know, so I need to get hooked up with y'all to try to get these platforms in order. Miss Paulina. I'm sorry, Mr. Cornelius had his hand up. Did you have a comment, or you just keep messing up?
You always see my hand like a question late. But it's okay. Yeah. Well, I was just piggybacking off Mr. Nick. He made a great point that you know, not everybody starts in the same spot, and a lot of times, you know, we all think that. And I, for one, grew up with a single mom, and so I always approach things I approach every situation like I'm down 20 and I got to score 40 points, and the refs is on their side and the crowd's clapping. So I always thought that I had to work harder than everybody else. So I think that understanding people's situations, and you can better understand the individual, and you can kind of know where they're coming from when they're approaching different situations. But also the keyboard gangster thing is very real nowadays, and I think that more than ever we have to be responsible and not engage in those type of things, and that goes back to the emotional things, because when you get emotional, you start typing all kind of stuff, and the thing that I'm really excited about is that now we're living in a time in the world where it's the first time ever it's unpopular to be racist, and so you can kind of see where people stand, and it's not popular anymore, and I have my hand. I remember what Sierra's question was, what the question she was answering. When that gentleman was upset about, saying we were just tearing down anything we didn't understand. And I think that a lot of us are educating ourselves now because we have that information, and we're starting to feel like we were lied to in history class. In the books that we've read, we found out that a lot of this stuff is lies. And so that you start seeing the monuments starting to come down, and you start to see all these different things, but it's because we're actually getting the facts now. We're actually getting the things that not what you want us to know. We're starting to actually know what was happening, and so a lot of us are starting to realize that it really wasn't what we thought it was. Everything we learned, it turns out that it was shifted to a certain perspective, and it turned out not to be the truth. But yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about.
Gotcha. Miss Paulina.
Yes, ma'am.
Is there really a generational gap, or do you think there is more of a personal experience gap regarding the subject of racism?
That's an interesting question. In my opinion, I think that is personal. It's something personal. It depends on how you see your environment. As a Latino in East Texas, being a Latino in East Texas is tough. We don't have the resources. We don't have the leaders that we're supposed to have. You can see in the city council, we don't have one that is Latino. We need one Latino there. We need representation, Ms. Pam. So in order to be a better community as a whole, I think we need representation. It's very important. That way we don't have these kind of issues like racial issues. If we have representation, we're gonna have a voice.
So you don't think that there is just an issue because you all are millennials and, I'm 30 years older than y'all, and I can't really understand your generation. You think it's more a personal aspect when it comes to racism, not age. Okay.
No age.
Miss Sierra, you had a comment quickly? Your hand was up.
Thank you. See, that works so much. No, I said I'm kind of like Cornelius. I actually had a comment about something previously, but I'll hold off for the next.
Okay, dear. I'm sorry, I can't see the hands up, and the producer is telling me, I guess, 5 minutes later. Mr. Dwayne, do you believe protests providing awareness and educating high traffic groups are effective to combat racism?
I guess it would be for me, yes and no. And the reason I say that, I think definitely that for our voices to be heard, I definitely think there is a different approach that we need to take, which the protesters going out, I agree with that. But the part of in the protest, I think Cornelius was saying it, we need to be focused in what we're doing if we're going to protest. Let's stick to the facts. Let's stick to the things that we're there to protest about. I personally believe some of the extra things that we've seen through the news and other, the burning and the looting and things like that, I personally don't agree with, because I feel like that takes away from the effect of what we're trying to communicate. So that's why I say yes and no. I definitely think that the protest, I think our voice needs to be heard. I think that our voice is being heard now And the thing that I would say about the protest that I like now, that kind of like what Cornelius was saying, that we haven't ever seen before, it's not just a Black person or a white person or a Hispanic, it's all of us together coming out and protesting against racism as a whole. So I definitely think that that part of the protest is what we need for our voices to be heard. That we're not gonna put up with this anymore. I mean, this is not what we don't agree with, and some of the other panelists have said before, and being able to hear our voice. So I think that it's good, but I think sometimes when we divert from that, it takes the focus away from our real purpose and what we're trying to accomplish.
Gotcha. Veronica, you had a comment?
Yes, I think that the protest, when done correctly, like you said, you know, with respect, and it's not regarding any other topic, that it's wonderful. It's definitely needed. It's more than just sharing a post. It's kind of like in your face. You can't ignore this. You know, you have to see me. I think the unity is definitely a plus, because I can speak for myself, being an African-American woman. It is wonderful to see my Hispanic and Caucasian brothers and sisters standing with me when, you know, there's an injustice, regardless of who it's directed towards. I think that unity not only brings us closer together as a city or state or town, but just as the people, you know. But I do also believe that is just one step in the overall movement as far as what we need to really affect change. If we protest and yet we're not being educated and we're not really being informed, knowing what to do and how to do, then it's nothing more than a banging cymbal. So yes, the protests are great for the attention getter, but now what do we do after the protesting? Mm-hmm. I think it's important that we have solutions and strategic plans in place for once all the dust settles or once all the protesting is over.
Gotcha. Miss Jamie, you had a quick comment?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I'm in the same realm with the protests. Yes and no. You know, I mean, it's our right to be able to protest. Anybody has the right to be able to protest under the First Amendment. But you know, when it's destructive, and when I think some of it, I should say, also has to do with that education piece. I think some people are just out to just use this protest to be able to cause destruction. And I think there is a responsibility to those that are wanting to maintain a peaceful protest to keep it a peaceful protest. And get those people out that are trying to make it into a different direction by causing destruction, if that makes sense. But even things that are coming down, there are things that are being destructed that have nothing to do with the movement, that have nothing to do with the protests and the rioting. And they're just wanting to create destruction, and we're forcing things upon politicians and communities to say this is bad, but yet when you look at the facts of these things that they're destroying, it has nothing to do with what the movement is about. And I just feel that there needs to be a responsibility of people that are doing protests to reach out and just educate those people. And if they're not willing to listen, then they need to go. We just need to be more vocal and saying, you need to get out. If you're going to be destructive, you need to get out. That's my opinion.
Gotcha. Veronica, I'm going to catch you with your question or your comment. I have to get to Sierra with a question. Miss Sierra, where are we missing it as baby boomers? I'm sorry, as somebody sent this question, but I guess they weren't thinking about millennials. Where are you all missing it as where are we missing it? It is coming from baby boomers. And where did we go wrong? Where are we missing it? And where did we go wrong?
Okay, it broke up a little bit. You said, where are the baby
Where
boomers?
Where are we missing it as baby boomers? And where did we go wrong when it comes to the millennials?
For me personally, I think it's just the lack of trying to get to know our generation. It's just not trying to fit into how we either communicate or different things that we correlate.
I think your signal is bad, Miss Sarah.
I personally,
I think we may have lost Miss Sierra, Mr. Producer. Miss Veronica, you had that comment?
Yes, I have a comment based on what Jamie had shared, as well as what the question you had for Sierra. And so I agree with you 100% that we have kind of gotten off topic, because you look at a lot of the monuments and even the school name here in Tyler, you know, people are protesting and petitioning for it to be changed. These are things, and this is my opinion, but these are things that are just not that important. If it is not changing policy and procedure, if it is not making a direct impact on someone's life for the better, it's irrelevant at the moment. I think using the momentum right now
to go back in there because I'm on this call,
to really push policy and procedure is what we should be more focused on, and less on, oh, well, this street name, or oh, this school name. Because the reality is, if you really stop and look around, these things have been here for years, and they are genuinely not affecting us physically. However, certain policies are. So we definitely want to take care of that. And go ahead, because her mic is back on.
Yeah. Sierra, where are we missing it as baby boomers, and where did we go wrong?
I think as far as where the baby boomers went wrong, I would say just getting to know the methods of communications with the millennial generation and how we view life and how drastically different our lives are. We can spend thousands of dollars on a degree, and that means nothing once we get it. And now we're in debt, and now we can't get a house, and now we have children, and now we have to work at a minimum wage job, or just knowing how different society is for us as opposed to how it was for you all. And some people, just like how you mentioned as far as the single parent example, it's not the same for everybody. You have to understand that the way you were brought up and the ideals that you had is not the same. It is a cat. I'm sorry. Oh my God, a black cat right here. And oh my God, I'm so sorry. But yeah, that's communication is one of the things that is really different, or losing the gap for the generation between the baby boomers and the millennials.
Gotcha. Okay, Miss Jamie, where are millennials missing it?
Oh, wow. Can you expand a little bit on that? Because I'd really like to get the context.
I think it came from the context because, again, this came from the public. But just as I said with Miss Sierra's question, where are we missing it as baby boomers and where did we go wrong? Well, where are you all as millennials missing it and where did you go wrong?
Okay. I guess in, I can't speak for everybody, I can only speak on just what I know and how I feel. So I feel that where a lot of millennials are missing it really could just be an education thing, or it could be where they're not willing to talk. Like, it's my way or the highway. Maybe it's that kind of mentality of, I know more than you, like my 8-year-old little daughter sometimes, she challenges me and she's just like, but mommy, I know this answer. And I'm like, yeah, but you don't know the fullness of the answer. You know what I'm saying? And maybe that could be a part of it, where some millennials, where if they're missing it, it's because they're closing themselves off to fully knowing the education of it. And when they're challenged or when they're being told, about the fullness of of an answer, they get offended. And I'm sorry, but facts don't care about your feelings. And in order for us to be a good generation, we need to be open to understanding the generations that are ahead of us. But then the generation that's ahead of us needs to take the responsibility to make sure that we are educated, that we are having that discussion and that dialogue with each other, if that makes any sense.
Definitely. Okay, Miss Caitlin and Miss Sierra has comments on those. 1 minute at least, please. Miss Caitlin.
Yes, ma'am. Kind of at the beginning of what Jamie was saying, and I wanted to like finish because I knew where she was going with what she was trying to say. There's some emotional intelligence, I think, and some knee-jerk reaction and maturity, kind of. And I hate to say that because I like to think that I'm, a mature adult as a millennial, a younger millennial. And but I think that I've over very different subjects, I've said this a few times recently, that millennials are eager to advocate for something. It kind of goes back to us wanting to also support nonprofits and wanting to care about something and give back and make a difference and make a change, a positive change. And I think that eagerness to advocate and to be a voice sometimes leads to immaturity as far as not necessarily, I don't want to say waiting your turn, but having the diplomacy to wait your turn a little bit, bite your tongue when it's appropriate, but also to advocate with grace and to understand that not everyone has that same opinion, but you voicing your opinion doesn't mean that it's going to change their mind, but it's still, everyone's valid in their opinion. And it's a matter of trying to be that voice and not just being the right voice. That's not the point.
Gotcha. Miss Sierra, 1 minute, please.
Yeah, honestly, when Ms. Jamie was speaking, she said that it's upon the generation before us to make sure that we're educated. And I think that's extremely important for our generation, because I think the ball has been dropped with us because we haven't had the leaders to really just pass the baton and say, hey, this is what you need to know. This is how you need to know it. Like some of us speak different, like family members speak different languages, our parents, so we're helping them pay bills, or we're helping them do many different things that other people are not privy to. So as far as the waiting your turn concept, or and I think I kind of want to have more of a dialogue even at a later point about the idea of being mature enough to respond or communicate in certain forums, because I don't think that maturity should define you being able to have your voice in certain forums, because I think that's kind of where the miscommunication comes from, because the reason that a lot of people speak is because they don't have that grace or that education, and they're trying to figure it out. And the only way that they have to figure it out is go to a city council meeting or a school board meeting, because they know if they have an issue about this thing, this is supposed to be the place where they can come and voice that opinion. And I don't think that you should have to have a PhD in order to respond, because I think it's upon the leaders in the older generations to make sure that they are being graceful in their response. Please know that people do not know what you know. People do not have hundreds of pages of manuscripts to know exactly the framework or the systems that you know. They know nothing, and then they have went through a whole different 20 different people to get a simple answer. So yeah. I'll just stop there. You said 1 minute.
Yep. Gotcha. Miss Nancy, do you feel that millennials are making more money than baby boomers? If so, how is that affecting the economy?
I definitely do. I think they have created so many different ways to make money that we did not utilize those platforms before, just because we're so digital savvy. That I think that it has created a lot of that. I know that it's created not only we create so much of the workforce already, and just that on its own allows us to have such a strong voice and purchasing power as well. So I do think that we have made a lot of strides, changes, and sometimes I know that maybe those before us did not agree as much as how we work and how we we think. But I do think that we have been able to provide a lot towards our economy. And not only that, but we've been able to provide a lot of new and smart ways of how to work.
Awesome. Miss April, is the state of our nation possible to change?
I think with people in leadership that are committed to seeing change and following it through, I think that that is possible. It's certainly not going to be easy, and it's not going to happen overnight. There's going to be, for lack of a better term, snot's going to fly. There's going to be a lot of hurt feelings along the way. There's going to be difficult and very awkward conversations along the way. People will have to be committed to seeking to understand other points of view. As you asked a question earlier, when we talked about where maybe millennials had missed the boat, I keep thinking that sometimes we're not willing to meet people where they are. And it may not be just millennials. It could be any of the generations. Sometimes we're not willing to meet people halfway or meet them where they are. We're not taking into consideration where someone else's place is in their understanding of whatever topic you're discussing. And so you're choosing to start where you are, and there's this huge gap. And so you're not ever going to get that person even remotely interested in what you have to say, much less to change an opinion, perhaps, if you're not willing to start where they are and take those baby steps and say, okay, how can I get you to this level of understanding? Or how can I get myself to your level of understanding? If neither one of the people are willing to reach out, then that's certainly not going to happen. And I believe that it's going to take something like that for our nation to change. There are far more good people in this nation than there are people that are on the wrong side of history. So it's a matter of us banding together and working together and not in silos. I think we all want the same goals. Unfortunately, for the longest time, we've been working independent of each other.
Awesome. Mr. Nick, is public school a part of the problem or a part of the solution?
Well, I think that if you look at the history of public school and the rise of private schools, that was, and I'm not afraid to say something that may be construed as controversial, that's white flight. I mean, so I think that we learned to coexist in public schools because a lot of our families, whether they're white, black, or brown, don't have the resources to go to private schools. So I think public schools impact all of us. It's going to impact our future economy locally, on a state level and on a national level. So I think that public schools aren't a problem. I think because at the end of the day, it's just the building. It's the people that are inside the building that are educating the youth, that have that responsibility, that really make up a school. And I think that, even as a lawyer, and doctors and whatnot, I think teachers should be making much more money than me. I think teachers should be compensated in a way that we really indicate through our public budgets that we care about the future of our children. So I think public schools are, it's the cornerstone of our society. And I think that if the quality of public schools goes down, we're all in trouble. I think that it's in our best interest to value teachers and the public school system for what it is. And that's the bedrock of our society.
Awesome. Ms. Paulina, do millennials have the answers for the fight on racism?
We need to vote. I'm very positive that can be the change. If we don't encourage the others, won't be possible. I think if we have someone as a leader that take care after us, it's going to be very important. Maybe I'm very positive, but if we have leadership, I see the change. I can see the change. Everything is political.
Gotcha. Mr. Cornelius, I hadn't forgotten about your comment, but here's your question and you can comment as well. What should we be doing as a society right now?
As a society, I think that we should be focusing on loving each other, thinking about different ways we can upbring each other. I mean, bring each other up instead of tearing each other down. every day I get online on these social medias, and I see different people tearing each other down on several different platforms and several different levels on several different topics. And so it's not enough people, reaching out trying to love somebody rather than tearing people down. And as far as the comment, I was thinking about things that we're doing wrong as millennials. I think a lot of times we're seeking instant gratification because we have the social medias, the likes, the comments. We're posting stuff and we're constantly looking to see who's liking it, who's commenting, and seeing if we can get 100 likes, stuff like that. I think that's really where we're dropping the ball at, because it's not enough genuine, human interaction, and I think it's taken away from who we are as people. And I think that we can do better at that, because then it rolls over to the commitment side of things. I think that a lot of us, we don't even desire positions of leadership, like not really, like seriously, like if you ask someone of my age, or even the people on this call, like when mayor comes up, would you run? I don't think that either of us would say, yeah, like I'm gonna run for mayor. We don't really desire those positions, but I think in order for really for the world to start changing, we have to start desiring to be the change and going into those leadership positions, because you see more times than not, all the leadership positions across the board, state, local, and on a nationwide front, it's all the older generation, and they don't have the input from us to actually invoke the change that we need. In my opinion, I think that they need our voices. They need to hear our opinions. They need to hear how the things are working in a real sense of your time, how the world is working right now. And I think that enough of us need to stand up and say, hey, I really want to be the change, instead of just kind of being behind the closed doors and like, hey, yeah, if you need me, I got you, but I don't really want that position.
Gotcha. Ms. Veronica, you had a 60-second comment?
Yes. I think that it's great, and you're absolutely right, Cornelius. A lot of times we don't want to run for those leadership positions. I know that the main thing has been take all the emotion out of it. And yes, when it comes to decision making and when it comes to setting policies, yes, these should not be emotional decisions. However, if we just from the fact that we need to at times heal, get more education, self-awareness, all of these things are important, making up an individual, because each person makes up the community, and then of course our city and our state as a whole. So if you have a whole lot of sick people, and self included, it's just not going to be the best environment. I think then we can skip some of these conversations about compassionate communication and the willingness to communicate, when we already have an understanding of not only who we are, but what we stand for. So it goes back to self-education and healing, in my opinion.
Gotcha. Miss Caitlin, your question was about leadership, but since Cornelius and Veronica didn't hit on it, I'm gonna take it out. So for you, how is what's happening now affecting the children of the millennials?
You're asking someone who has no children. We're going to talk about leadership. Yeah, Jamie's like, please pick me. I'm not close enough to anyone that has kids old enough for me to be able to even have those conversations or know that information. Is about the best answer I got for you.
Okay, give me your answer pertaining to, and the question was, should millennials be getting into leadership positions, and are they?
My answer is 100% yes, they should be. That doesn't necessarily mean that every single millennial is fit for leadership positions. They may be a behind the scenes person, and they may be the person that's writing the speech for the person who's in the leadership position, and that's fine too. But are they, from my perspective, being in a couple different leadership oriented organizations, I'm seeing yes, overwhelmingly an amount of millennials that are getting into leadership positions and with very specific intentions doing that. And I'm sorry, my dog is making noise. And I think that it is important for our generation to get into leadership and to use the technology to our advantage, to use the new ways we're learning to communicate to our advantage. And I think it could be a really good change.
All righty, thank you, dear. And I know we have several panelists that have children, and all of y'all can answer, but I only have one because we still have closings to get to. So, Miss Nancy, how is what's happening now affecting the children of the millennials?
Affecting now as in COVID, as in
all of it.
All of it.
Racial.
Well, yeah, well, they're definitely affected. You know, I know as far as COVID, you know, all of us were affected by COVID. And I think a lot of millennials like myself that had children, they were also, we were affected as to learning. You know, we all value teachers, and many of us, you know, before COVID understood just how much work they put in without really receiving as much credibility as they should. And so we definitely saw a lot of us having to work extra hard to be able to teach our children. They were affected just because, you know, they're trying to understand their realm of everything that's happening around them. They're children, so they don't fully understand. And it's difficult for any person, individual, especially as a parent, to have to explain things to your children when it comes not only to COVID, but when racial remarks are being made, or when as a parent you face racism and they have to witness that. It's very difficult, very challenging. As parents, all of us, we want to retain that innocence of our children for as long as we possibly can. But we also want to be able to create an environment where they fully can be open and be able to see things for what they really are, so that we can teach them how they need to conduct themselves. So when they're faced with these types of challenges. And I know that for us in particularly, you know, it was definitely something that we worked from home with the teachers as much as we could. Every one of us have a different scenario, and that's something that we all had to understand, that our household was very different from other households. Some may have just a one parent, some may have where both parents were working like ours, and so there was alternative ways to care for them. I mean, there was just so many different alternatives and scenarios that children were so affected because it was so out of their norm and out of what was consistent and regular for them. So they were definitely affected. I think that, again, I go back to the thought of a lot of it comes from home. I think even as a single parent or not, you still have as a parent that wish to be able to educate your children on any issue, let it be racism, anything that you can think of. You know, I think that it does start from home with you teaching your children. You don't want other people to teach your children for you. You want to start that foundation for them. And yes, it takes a village. From your school teachers to your preachers, to your ministers, educators, community members, I think it takes a village, but I think it all starts with you as a parent on creating that foundation for them.
Awesome. I will not go back into our who is a village. Panelists, you all have been extremely awesome. Boy, millennials are some bad folks. Now, your closing solutions. 1 minute with your closing remarks. Please provide solutions that you think can help us as a house, a neighborhood, a city, a county, a state, a nation, a continent, a world, to heal racial and generational relationships. Where do we start from here? Let's go with Miss Jamie.
Thank you, Dr. Pam, and thank you for everybody that was on tonight. I feel very blessed to be amongst all of you guys and to be able to get out our opinions and our message. Where I feel that a step towards the right direction, you got to vote and you need to become educated. And I want to say this from a place in my heart for all races, that I don't want you to feel that just because you're a certain race, you have to vote that way. I don't want you to think because you grew up in this kind of home, you have to vote that way. Because I think there's a lot of politicians that we have in place of all races that have been in DC, that have been on state levels and local levels for far too long, and they are pandering to us. And they are trying to say the right things in order to get our vote, but yet they haven't maybe done anything. So become educated, become aware of what your values are and what you want to be seen change. And if that's on the left side, the right side, or in the middle, then go with that mentality. And I say that again with all the love that I can. I love everybody here. If y'all would like to ask me any other questions, you can look me up at Jamie Slayton Mims on Facebook, and love y'all.
Thank you, Jamie. Dwayne?
I will say that I think it's a conglomerate of things that we've all said to on this live tonight. I think definitely voting is one, but I also think, like what Ms. Veronica said, it's the self-education, educating ourselves. And then I think Cornelius also mentioned it, or he mentioned saying that some people don't want to take that leadership role. I think also for those who have that desire to take a leadership role to make a change. So I definitely think that once we educate ourselves, we heal, we know what's going on in our society. If we truly want to make the change, somebody has to step up, or somebody's have to step up in order to make that change, because we are that front generation now. So, I mean, I just think that it's educating ourselves, voting, and then follow through. Make sure that we're following through with the things that we put in place, to make sure that, because a lot of times things get started and it's a great idea, but it usually fizzles out because, after a while we lose passion for it. So I think with us keeping that fire burning, doing the things that we need to do for self-education, voting, and things of that nature, I think those are the steps that we can take to see, so our kids going forward, they'll see us making the right step. And then also a couple of the panelists said it, making sure that that's given to our children and our grandchildren and so forth, so that it continue to make an effect.
Awesome. Miss April?
I won't continue to mention the very wonderful ideas that the panelists have already shared, but I will add on one more. We are going to have to continue to work together. Again, we can vote individually, we can do a lot of these things individually, but we are going to have to continue the momentum that we have now with protests and conversations, and continue to unite, because one voice can only be heard so loud. And when several of our voices are being heard at the local, the state, the regional, the national level, they're going to be really hard to ignore. And so there is going to come a point where the collective voice of the idea of unity and ending oppression and whatever else we have on our agenda, it's going to be really hard to ignore when there are that many of us speaking out. And so we have to stop being afraid to speak out.
Awesome. Mr. Cornelius.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for having me, first and foremost. I enjoyed each and every one of you guys. It's been an awesome night. But I think that we have to go back to that love thing. I like to see more people, seeing life through a colorless lens. Because if you can see people as just people, how would you see them? Like, what would you see? You know, would you see, you know, your brother? Would you see a great salesman? Would you see, you know, a great teacher? I mean, I think that's just what it all comes down to, just being great people. I think we have to get away from, you know, being on the right or the left or Democrat or Republican. I think that we have to get away from those things and just be good people. Do what's right and and not do what's wrong, and continue to try to educate ourselves about each other. You know, I think that that's really important as we're going to move forward as a society, the society that we want to see, right? So just getting to know people and just, you know, feeling the love. Do something every day to get to know your neighbors. I live in a community where I am the minority, and you know, I walk outside to wave my hand at I mean, because they're older generation, they're older people, and I just want to go out of my way to speak to them, to let them know that I love them and I want to get to know them. And I think that if we did that more every day throughout in the community, we'll have a phenomenal community that's full of love and full of people just helping each other every day.
Awesome. Miss Veronica?
Thank you so much, Dr. Phoenix, for inviting me. And thank you, panelists, for not just being here, but also for sharing your insight and for listening, and listening with your whole heart. I think that it is a full process, and I think that we have to definitely start building that empire, which is our education foundation. And it is going to be at our local, regional, and state levels. And this is just information about what our rights are, you know, what we have the abilities to do, the officials even, so that we understand how the government and community connect, and building a legacy. Our legacy is actually going to promote our community, and it fosters mentorship. It's necessary for any leader. You know, you have to be whole as a leader, and in order to instruct anybody else, you know, you have to be in that position. And then as far as the voting, of course, we know it's necessary, but without the proper education and without being whole, then you really don't know who to vote for, or you're unaware of all of the main issues. And then just remember that it's a process, it's a real marathon. And so you can't just think that protesting today is enough or voting tomorrow is enough. It's the things that we do in our everyday life. And circling back to what Cornelia said, the love. And in order to really have that love, it's important to have that healing and self-development.
Awesome. Mr. Nick?
I think it was Albert Einstein that said that if he had an hour to save the world, he'd spend 59 minutes defining the problem. And I think it's forums like these that help us define the problems that we have. And we've got to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. I think our generation is stepping into those leadership roles. I think that we've got to lead the conversation. And I think that the love part is absolutely it. You know, we've got to walk the walk. I think that, you know, people always say you be the change that you want to see. And it starts with us. It starts with every single person. And I think that, you know, whether you're running for office, whether you're voting, all of that is important. And I think that we've got to translate the energy and the passion that's out there in the demonstrations and in the peaceful protests into the voting booth. And I think that we've got to hold our elected officials accountable. And I think that we need more people like all of you who are on the panel, who are understanding, who are willing to learn about one another. And I think we need more folks like Pam Phoenix that are organizing these panels and really, really getting out there. I know, Pam, I want to give you a special shout out because I think it was the very first town hall that you organized. It didn't have a big turnout, and you stuck with it. And I think that these are the types of intersections that we need in order to understand each other.
Amen. Thank you, Nick. Miss Caitlin.
I think that what I keep coming back to is exactly what Veronica said about in your everyday life and what you're doing and making a change in that aspect. And I think that, yes, be a leader in whatever capacity that means for you, whether that's as a parent or as a part of your friend group or an organization, or even if it does mean becoming an elected official, being intentional about the rooms that you're in and the people that you invite and that are in those rooms with you, intentional about the conversations you're having with those people and with those that are close to you and everybody else around you, and just intentional about the positive changes that you're wanting to, your end goal that you're trying to create, and being mindful of those as you navigate being a leader, again, in whatever capacity that means, and being that positive impact.
Awesome. Miss Nancy?
Kudos again, Dr. Phoenix. Thank you for putting this all together. I think that as everyone has mentioned, you know, I think that as millennials, we are all, I consider all of us have leadership qualities. Every one of us just utilize it and choose to do it in a different way. I know that we also need to learn from our previous generations. Also, don't think that we know it all. I think that that's one of the things that we should also think about, become more engaged. A lot of us are already engaged in our communities. Try to go out and become involved with groups that you normally would not. Like I was mentioning, you know, somewhere you normally would not migrate towards. Try to go towards the groups that you normally wouldn't, so that they can not only will you be learning from them, and educating yourselves about their culture, their traditions, why they think the way they think, but they'll be learning from you as well. So I think those are some key points that maybe we should take away as millennials.
Awesome. Miss Sierra?
I think that accountability, transparency, equity, and resiliency is really, really important, because if we're going to be the leaders of today and tomorrow, and we're going to advocate for the solutions that we want to see in the community, we have to make sure that we are building up our energy tank with resiliency, because when you do the work and when you're consistent with it, it's just like how Nick gave you some applause about continuing the work, even though you didn't have met the expectations you wanted initially, you kept going. And I think that's the biggest problem with our generation, is we forget to go through the process. You can't go over the process, you can't go around it. You have to go through it in order to really get the outcome that you want. And I think that's a part of the biggest gap. The older generation, they're like, no, we went through it. We went through every single emotion. So we are experts. We understand. We didn't just get the paper and then, say we're experts. So I think that making sure that you are resilient in the work, because it is not going to be pretty every single day, and you're going to get a lot of pushback, and that's okay, because that's where you gain the fundamentals, and you have to make sure that you're doing the work to dismantle the structure that's in place that continues to perpetuate the systemic policies and the oppression that are embedded in those systems, because that's where racism and disenfranchisement truly comes from. It's the policies, and that's why they've been able to continue and manifest in the way that they have, because the part of the system is the part that's not pretty, and people can't grasp how complex it is, but you have to do the work. So that's the part we have to do, is just get down and dirty.
Awesome. Miss Paulina.
I want to use my 2 minutes. I wait until the last minute. Talking about racism, you need to know something that is going on here in the Latino community. I'm very involved with them every single day. I'm working with them. And there is a race disparity in the Hispanic community, because they're not treated equally with regards to salary. 80% of restaurants workers are Latinos. Latino restaurants workers don't make a decent wage. Before COVID-19, restaurants workers were doing good if they made 10 or 10.50 per hour. When COVID-19 hit, workers were let go. When they returned to work, many got half pay. Think about this, working for 5 hours per hour. Think about trying to raise a family on $5 per hour. What does this mean? It means children are going hungry. Parents can either pay rent or electricity or food, so they go hungry. Yes, some families get some food from the schools, from the food banks, and they feel very comfortable with PATH. In the city of Tyler, little children are going hungry. People can make a difference. Please donate. Donate to PATH. That way they can buy for them beans, rice, tortillas, at least the more essential. This is a Latino problem, and this is also an African American problem. Minorities are suffering, so the struggle is real. These are words that we think, but they don't have a voice. We don't have a leader. It's sad what is going on.
Thank you, Ms.
For your
Paulina.
time. Thank you for your time today.
Welcome. Thank you to all of our panelists. We sincerely appreciate all that you've said tonight to help our community. Thank you to all of our viewers, to our producer, Eddie J. And please, y'all, listen in on him on Tuesday nights at 7 p.m. on his Facebook page, Talk Time with Eddie J., where he discusses mental health issues. And a great thanks again to KETK for giving us more love and streaming us live as well. Don't forget, we will be back next week while you are preparing for your 4th of July. We'll be on July the 2nd, next Thursday at 7 for the Heavyweight Championship, Corona versus Education. Our panelists will be Dr. Marty Crawford, the Superintendent of TISD, and Mr. George Roberts, the CEO of Net Health, and prayerfully some school board panelists. So y'all know we're in for it. Get your questions in now, and y'all know y'all have a lot of them. And we thank you for being on board today. Miss Veronica, if you could please close us out in prayer.
All right. Thank you, God, for allowing us to come together with open minds and hearts. God, let some of the things or all of the things that have been mentioned here tonight penetrate the hearts and the leaders that you'd like to use in those positions. Give us traveling grace, and in Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Y'all take care and God bless.